right, so we're diving deep today, folks. Going to be looking at how sunlight and weather, can actually impact your health. Yeah, we're cracking open this book called Sunlight, Weather, and You by Conrad Reicher.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Like, how often do you think about like the connection between your body and what's happening outside?
Right. Yeah, not too often, I guess.
Not really, right?
Yeah.
But this book dives right into all that stuff.
Looking forward to it.
Okay, so let's start with sunshine. Okay, so like right off the bat, this book hits you with this crazy fact. Humans, like horses,
Yeah.
we actually make vitamin D3 just from being in the sun.
That's wild. I didn't know we were like horses in that way.
Right.
Huh.
It's super important too for like healthy bones, a good immune system, all that.
Makes sense. And it's not like some new discovery,
Right.
Think about like those indigenous cultures, right? Like up north. The Inuit, the Sami people, the Yupik,
Yeah.
living with like barely any sun, right?
Yeah.
But Riker explains how they've adapted, like over, I don't know how many years. Incorporating foods that are high in vitamin D, like fatty fish, into their diets.
Wow. That's amazing. I mean, that really shows you how our bodies are like made to work with nature, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And speaking of working with nature, right? The book also gets into how sunlight affects your mental health too.
Oh, really?
Yeah, yeah. Did you know that there's like a direct link between how much sun you get and how much serotonin your brain makes?
I did not know that. That's really interesting.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah.
So serotonin, right? It's like a major player in like regulating your mood.
Yeah.
So like that's why, you feel good after being out in the sun,
Yeah, like that mood boost.
Exactly.
That's
And Riker even tells this story about this guy named John, a software engineer, who had like seasonal affective disorder, SAD.
Yeah.
But he felt so much better after moving to an apartment that had more natural light.
wow. That's pretty powerful.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
It makes you think, that your environment isn't just like some background thing. It really affects how you feel.
Totally.
And, the book even talks about light therapy as a way to treat SAD.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so, they use artificial light to kind of mimic sunlight, and get those mood and sleep cycles back on track.
Oh, wow.
So, like, even when you don't have enough sun, there are ways to get those benefits.
Oh, it's amazing what we can do now.
Right.
Yeah. And, it makes me think we always focus on the bad stuff about too much sun, like skin damage, right? But the sun itself isn't bad.
Right.
It's all about finding the right balance. Yeah.
Sure, yeah. Okay, let's switch gears a little. Move on from sunshine to, like, the bigger picture, the weather.
Okay.
I've always heard that, when the weather changes, it can make joint pain worse, especially if you have arthritis. Like, is that really true?
That's a good question. And, Riker actually looks into the science behind that belief that we all have. And, it turns out that changes in the air pressure, that atmospheric pressure, can really mess with the tissues in our joints.
Real?
Yeah. So for people with arthritis, their joints are already sensitive, right? They might feel those changes even more.
That makes sense. It's like our bodies have these incredible, like, barometers almost.
Right.
Like always responding to these tiny changes in the environment.
Exactly.
Oh, and speaking of responding to the environment, Raker has this funny anecdote about a medical student whose roommate was a meteorology student, weather guy. And the weather guy was convinced that cold weather made him get colds more easily.
Oh, interesting. It's funny, but, Riker actually looks at both sides of that.
Okay.
So cold weather, it doesn't directly cause colds, but it can kind of weaken your immune system, So you might be more likely to get sick when it's chilly out.
That's interesting. But wait, doesn't the book also say that cold weather can be good for you in some ways?
Yeah. That part was really cool. So there's this stuff called brown fat. It's not like the regular fat we think of. Brown fat actually burns calories and like helps keep you warm. And being out in the cold can actually make your body produce more of it.
Wow. So there's like an upside to those cold days after all.
Exactly.
It's amazing how our bodies are always adjusting, always trying to find that balance with whatever's going on outside. Okay, so we've talked about sunshine and some general weather stuff, but I'm curious about something more specific. What about skin health? Does Riker talk about that?
Oh, yeah. He dives into that too. And, this is where things get a little more serious. We all know about sunburn, of course. But Riker goes deeper. He talks about the long-term risks of getting too much sun, like premature aging, skin damage, even skin cancer.
Yeah, that's scary.
Yeah.
It's easy to forget about those things when you're just trying to get a tan. You know?
Right. It's almost like we connect tanning with being healthy, with looking good.
Exactly.
But the book actually points out that skin cancer is the most common cancer in the whole world. It's a pretty strong reminder that we need to be smart about the sun.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So what does Riker say about protecting yourself?
Well, he actually uses this powerful example. He talks about Bob Marley, the musician. Marley had darker skin, but he still died from a rare kind of skin cancer. So it really shows you that anyone can be at risk.
Wow, that's a good point. I guess we all need to take sun protection seriously, no matter what our skin tone is.
Exactly. It's all about prevention. Riker has some really practical tips, like wearing sunscreen, of course, protective clothing, and trying to stay out of the sun when it's the strongest, during those peak hours.
Yeah, those seem like easy things you can do to make a big difference.
Right, simple stuff. Okay, so moving on. Remember we were talking about seasonal affective disorder earlier?
Yeah, the winter blues.
Well, it's actually more than just feeling down in the winter. Riker explains that when you don't get enough sunlight during those darker months, it can really mess with your circadian rhythm.
Circadian rhythm. Those are like our internal clocks, right?
Yeah.
The ones that control when we sleep and wake up.
Yeah, exactly. And when those rhythms get out of whack, it can affect, like, everything. Your mood, your energy levels, everything.
Wow. So how does light therapy help with that?
Well, Riker says that light therapy can kind of reset those internal clocks.
Oh, okay.
It's amazing, really, how something as simple as light can have such a big impact.
Yeah, it really is. So speaking of light and what it does, we were talking earlier about how sunlight helps our bodies make vitamin D, but Riker also mentioned something called retinal dopamine. What is that?
Okay, so this is where things get super interesting. Retinal dopamine. It's a type of dopamine that's produced in the retina of your eyes, and sunlight actually influences it directly. And get this, studies are showing that it could play a really important role in regulating your mood, keeping you alert, even helping you think more clearly.
Wait, so you're telling me that just sunlight hitting my eyes can make me happier and like a better thinker?
Pretty much, yeah. It's like this natural mood booster and brain enhancer all rolled into one. And Riker even says that some researchers think retinal dopamine might be part of the reason why light therapy works so well for SAD. It really makes you realize how interconnected our bodies are.
Yeah, it's amazing. Like, even the little things can have a big effect. Okay, so we've talked about sunshine and SAD, but what about like really intense weather, like the kind that makes you want to just stay inside and read a book? Does Riker talk about that?
He does. And he uses this really cool example, the Marathon des Sables.
Okay, I've heard of that. That's the one like through the Sahara Desert.
Yeah, exactly. It's this crazy race through the desert. And Riker uses it to show how extreme heat and humidity can push your body to its limits, like how well it can regulate its temperature and all that.
That sounds intense. Makes you realize you got to listen to your body, especially in those extreme conditions.
Absolutely. But he also talks about the other extreme, cold weather. He says that when it's really cold, your muscles can get stiff and your blood flow can change, which could make you more likely to get injured.
So whether it's super hot or freezing cold, we need to pay attention to how the weather's affecting us and be careful, right?
Exactly. But it's not just about the extreme. Riker also talks about how even small changes in weather can have a big impact on your health. Like, he talks about weather-related migraines.
Oh yeah, I know people who swear they can tell when a storm's coming because their head starts hurting. Like, is there any truth to that?
There is. Changes in barometric pressure, the same kind that often happen when the weather changes, can actually trigger migraines in some people.
So it's not just an old wives' tale, it's a real thing.
Yep, it's your body responding to those subtle shifts.
It's wild how sensitive we are to these things. What else does he talk about?
Well, he also points out how changes in temperature can affect people with allergies, especially those who are sensitive to pollen and mold. Like, when the weather gets warmer, the allergy season can last longer and the symptoms can be worse.
Ugh, that's rough. So it seems like the weather can really mess with us in a lot of ways, even when it's not extreme.
It really is a reminder that we're constantly interacting with our environment, and those interactions can affect us both physically and mentally.
Speaking of mentally, we've talked a lot about physical health, but I'm curious about the mental and emotional side of things. Does Riker address that?
Oh, absolutely. And it's honestly one of the most fascinating parts of the book. Riker gets into how sunlight and weather can really impact your mental well-being. He talks about things like seasonal affective disorder, the effects of daylight saving time, even the psychological effects of climate change.
Oh, wow. That last one sounds pretty heavy. I can imagine all the stress and anxiety that comes with thinking about climate change and what it means for the future.
It's real, and it's becoming more common. Riker calls it climate anxiety, or sometimes eco-anxiety. It's basically when you feel really distressed and worried about the impacts of climate change, both for yourself personally and for the world as a whole.
That makes sense. It's a reminder that our health isn't just about our bodies, it's about our minds and emotions too. So what does Riker suggest for dealing with climate anxiety?
Well, he says it's important to stay informed, but maybe limit how much negative news you're taking in.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And he also talks about focusing on what you can control, like taking action to address the issue.
Right. So it's about finding that balance between being aware and actually doing something without getting overwhelmed by all the bad stuff.
Exactly. It's about feeling empowered, not powerless. And, it's important to remember that you're not alone in this. Lots of people are experiencing climate anxiety, And there are resources and support systems out there.
That's good to know. It's a reminder that we're all in this together, facing these challenges as a community.
Right. Okay, so shifting gears a little bit. Let's move away from the anxieties of climate change and go back to the power of the sun. Riker talks about something that's getting more and more attention these days, the importance of morning sunlight.
Morning sunlight. I mean, I know getting some sun is good for you, but is there something special about the morning hours?
There is. Riker explains that getting sunlight early in the day can really have a big impact on your circadian rhythms, helping to keep your sleep-wake cycles on track and optimize your hormone production.
Basically, getting some morning sun can set you up for a better day, both physically and mentally.
That's the idea. Even a short walk outside in the morning sun can make a difference. It's such a simple way to use the power of sunlight to feel better.
That's great. I'm definitely going to try that. So we talked about morning sun, but what about the other end of the day? What about being exposed to light at night? Does Riker talk about that?
Oh, he does. And this is where things get really interesting. Riker explains that artificial light at night, especially the blue light that comes from electronic devices, can really mess with your sleep patterns and your hormone production.
Yeah, I've heard about blue light and how it can keep you awake, but what does it have to do with hormones?
Well, one of the main hormones affected by light exposure is melatonin, which helps regulate your sleep-wake cycle. And when you're exposed to blue light at night, it can actually stop your body from producing melatonin, making it harder to fall asleep and stay asleep.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I definitely noticed that it's harder to fall asleep after I've been on my phone or computer for too long before bed.
Exactly. Riker suggests trying to limit screen time in the hours before you go to bed and maybe using blue light filters or glasses to reduce your exposure. He also recommends creating a relaxing bedtime routine to help your body wind down.
Those are all great tips.
Yeah.
It's a good reminder that we have more control over our sleep and our health than we think. It's all about making good choices.
That's right. And speaking of making good choices, Riker has a whole chapter about something called bioclimatology.
Climatology.
Yeah.
That sounds kind of complicated. What is that?
Well, it's basically the study of how climate and weather affect living things, including humans. Riker looks at how different climates can influence our physical and mental health, our lifestyles, even our cultures.
So basically, where we live and what the climate's like can have a really big impact on us.
That's one of the main takeaways from the book. Riker actually argues that understanding bioclimatology can help us make better decisions about where we choose to live, how we design our homes, and how we change our lifestyles to thrive in different environments.
It's pretty amazing to think about how connected we are to our environment, you know? From the air we breathe to the sunlight that nourishes us. And it makes you think about the impact of climate change.
You're right. Climate change is a huge issue, and Riker doesn't shy away from talking about what it could mean for our health. He talks about how extreme weather events like heat waves, droughts, and floods are becoming more frequent and more intense.
Yeah, those events have a big impact on our health, both right away and in the long run. We've seen how dangerous heat stroke can be during heat waves, how diseases can spread after floods, and how droughts can lead to food shortages.
And those are just the direct effects. Riker also talks about the indirect effects, like how climate change can change where insects and animals live, which can then lead to the spread of diseases they carry. And then there's the mental health aspect, like the stress of being displaced from your home, climate anxiety, and just the general uncertainty of the future.
It's a lot to think about. It can be kind of overwhelming. But Riker doesn't just leave us with a feeling of doom and gloom, right? He talks about what we can do.
Exactly. He emphasizes that we all have a role to play in addressing climate change, both individually and collectively.
Okay, so what can we do?
Well, he talks about reducing our carbon footprint, which means trying to live in a way that produces less carbon dioxide and advocating for changes in policies, like laws and regulations that can help protect the environment. And also supporting communities that are most vulnerable to the effects of climate change.
It's a call to action, a reminder that we're not just helpless bystanders. We can make a difference both for ourselves and for the planet.
Exactly. It's about understanding that our health and the health of the planet are connected. We need to take care of both if we want to thrive.
This has been a really fascinating look at how sunlight and weather impact our health. Reading Sunlight, Weather, and You has really made me think about how much our environment shapes who we are.
It really is a journey of discovery.
Yeah.
It shows you all these amazing connections between our bodies, our minds, and the world around us.
And it's not just about understanding those connections, it's about using that knowledge to make good choices. Choices that support our well-being.
What I find really cool is how Riker brings together all these different areas of knowledge, biology, meteorology, psychology, even sociology, to help us understand our relationship with the environment in a holistic way.
It's a reminder that our health isn't just about what we eat or how much we exercise. It's also about the air we breathe, the sunlight we absorb, the climate we experience, and the choices we make to live in harmony with our environment.
Wow, so we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, right? But I feel like we've only just scratched the surface of this book. What really stood out to you?
You know, it's amazing how Riker brings together all these different things. Sunlight, weather, climate change, how it all affects our bodies and our mind. He really shows how connected we are to our environment.
Yeah, it's like we've been on this big adventure, exploring how our bodies work and how all these outside forces shape our lives. And it definitely feels like this adventure doesn't just end here, you know? It makes you want to keep learning and keep exploring. Totally. Raker makes it clear that we're not just like along for the ride on this planet. We have choices. We can make decisions that affect our health and even help create a healthier
I
environment.
love that. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's like the one big takeaway you hope people remember from sunlight, weather, and you?
That's a good question. I think the most important thing is that our health is tied to the health of our environment. Like they're totally connected. And when we understand that, when we make conscious choices and when we take action to protect our planet, we can create a healthier future for everyone.
I love that. It's about hope. It's about taking control. It's about creating a world where people and the planet can both be healthy. Well, folks, if you're as fascinated by this stuff as we are, you've got to check out Sunlight, Weather, and You by Conrad Reich.
It's a book that will really make you think differently about the world around you.
Absolutely.
It'll inspire you to make choices that are good for you and good for the planet. And you'll come away feeling like empowered to connect with nature and understand how much it influences your well-being.
You can find it on Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating world of sunlight, weather, and your health.